Oh, there she is. Oh, look at you.
Chaka Khan, Chaka Khan, Chaka Khan. I'm every woman. It's all in me.
Me.
I was a bit of Elvis.
Oh, well, what about you, Lexi? How
I
are
am
you?
frickin' fantastic. I am
Good,
really good,
good.
darling, because I just spent the weekend there medication free
Oh, fabulous.
through choice.
Oh,
I
okay.
decided to go easy on the pain relief just to see how I would get on. And I've been training every day last week, and I wanted to see what the impact was. Now, Saturday, I was very tense, very tight. I don't have pain anymore. And
Mhm.
I then went for a long walk with my gorgeous friend Danielle, and we went to Lochshore and we completed 13,469 steps.
Wow.
Hmm.
So how many, what was that? What does that work out in actual distance?
In actual distance, it's really long. You could.
So is it like 10K,
It's,
5K? Because I could
yes.
imagine you might have tiny feet.
Well, Danielle does because she's only like 4'9". So if I done 13 over nearly 14, she done 18. So she done taller than me. Yes, so that's been it. And what I purposely said to myself was, right, okay, I want to go easy on the medication because the dream is to get back to work and medication free. So that was my first weekend medication free. That's through choice. I still need them,
Uh-huh.
but I don't need them as much.
Well, that's good. Well, it's a step in the right direction, as you say.
How are you, work husband?
I am all right. I'm very tired. I haven't been sleeping very well, but I
Oh,
am okay. I am coping.
okay, well, hold on,
So I am.
hold on there now, we goddamn cotton picking minute now. What has you awake?
Just everything, and I've got quite a lot going on,
Okay,
as you
love.
know.
Yes.
So we've got a
Me
lot of
no,
gigs
me
coming
no.
up. We've got gigs coming up, got things going on outside of work, and I've got my holiday coming up in 19 days.
Oh, for
So I
God's
think I'm
sake.
starting to think about kind of like, have I got everything booked that I needed to
Yeah.
get booked? Have I got our
Yeah,
visa
yeah, yeah.
sorted? It's all that kind of stuff, you know.
Okay.
But anyway, enough about me and on to this week's episode.
Yes, I
So,
know. When you told, well, I can't wait. I cannot
well,
wait. I love this one. Let's go. Let's go.
let's do the intro. Okay, here we go. So this week on G&T Sips and Giggles, we are getting into something a bit deeper, but just as important. We are talking this week about toxic masculinity.
Now, before you clutch your pearls, this isn't about bashing men. It's about challenging those outdated ideas of what a real man should be. The stiff upper lip, the emotional blackouts, the man up mindset.
Yes, absolutely. And we'll be unpacking where that comes from, how it shows up in our relationships, our workspaces, and even on TikTok feeds. And most importantly, how we all suffer because of it.
So, grab a drink, pour the tea, and let's have an honest, sassy, and slightly uncomfortable conversation that just might help set some hearts and manhoods free. Now, sweetie, press play on that rugged heavy metal theme tune.
Well, welcome back. So this week we are wanting to talk about toxic masculinity. Now, as you said in the intro, this is not about man bashing. This is us giving our view
Yeah.
and our experiences on toxic masculinity. Now, I think to start this entire episode off, Lexi, I think we just need to clarify for everybody what we're talking about whenever we say toxic masculinity. And I think we need to debunk some misconceptions as well. What do you reckon?
Oh, yes, definitely. You
So
go.
no, you tell me what is your definition, or what do you think toxic masculinity actually means?
I, I mean, the suppressing of feelings is
Mm-hmm.
one, particularly sadness and fear,
Mm-hmm.
and equating masculinity with control, power, or even worse, violence. You
Oh,
know,
yeah.
I just
Yeah.
think all of those things are can be dealt with communication, opening up. Talking to you just need one person that a guy can trust,
Mm-hmm.
and and also, but it's avoiding the behaviors deemed feminine. Like the nurturing and the gentleness. It's not saying all masculinity is bad. It's about rejecting harmful expectations.
Well, I think that's it. It's cultural norms, isn't it? It's this
Mm,
sort of it's the cultural norms that idealize the aggression, as you said, that sort
yeah.
of that dominance that men need to be men, or as it's often sort of put to us, under the guise of being a real man. Do you
Yeah.
know that way?
Yeah.
Like an example of that might be a man who might feel ashamed, for example, to
Yeah.
cry at, say, a funeral, or
Mm-hmm.
even to talk about mental health because maybe he's been having a tough week.
Yeah.
That way. So I think we are kind of along the same lines, and certainly in terms of our understanding.
When I was growing up, I was born in 1967. You wouldn't believe it, but it's true. And there were six
You don't
kids.
look a day over 21.
Why, thank you, darling. I'll pay you later. So listen, but the thing about it was I grew up as a kid, a young kid, very young kid in the 70s and the 1980s. And even way back then, men were men and they had to be men. And I was the youngest of six kids and everybody was older than me. There was one girl and there was five boys and I was the youngest. So they were all football fanatics. So, and everything, and my father was real, God rest him, was real old school. Now, real old school, you know. And I remember the day when I was working in the Royal Victoria Hospital and I was a porter at the time in main x-ray and my granny, his mother, had took very ill and I went to get her to bring her into the department for an x-ray. So then during my lunch, I ran over to my parents' house, which was just across from the hospital, to tell him. And he knew that she wasn't going to make it, so to speak. And he never cried. He never got emotional.
Yeah.
He went down that route of, oh, God love her. And he never kind of expressed, not once, how he actually felt. And I remember as a young kid thinking to myself, oh my God, if that was my mum, I will scream the place down, And I think it was that old, that real old, well, you're not allowed. You're not supposed
Yeah.
to. You're supposed to be a man. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And that to me used to sicken me.
But I think with things like that, though, that's not to say that perhaps maybe he didn't grieve, because as you say, when,
Yeah, I
when
know.
people pass, they grieve in different ways, and
Yeah.
perhaps maybe he just didn't do that in front of anybody. And I think that's really part of what I guess you're talking about is that
Mm.
kind of what you're taught when you're growing up about being that real man. Do you know what I
Mm.
mean?
I
But
mean, I just, they were all football mad. My daddy and all my brothers, they were all crazy, crazy, crazy. I was always this camp, chubby kid. You know what I mean? I was Chunk from the Goonies, do you know? And I really was. And that's why I was my mummy's blue eye because my sister, but it was actually me and my mum who bonded, and we were like this the whole way, and we still are, thank God. But I guess if he grieved with my mum, and he done it in private, and that's just the way it was,
yeah,
But today, the whole mental health and I still feel that there's a lot of guys out there have a certain they they would feel ashamed,
hmm
they would feel
yeah.
embarrassed, you know, and all of that. Yes, sissy. What are you talking
But
about?
if
You,
But I think that's still prevalent, and even like, and I appreciate
yeah.
that there's probably only a couple of years difference between the two of us, but do you know what I mean? Like I think I have that sort of shared opinion as well about what we were taught about being real men. You know, we weren't allowed to cry when we got upset or hurt. I'm really struggling to remember whether or not, you know, I actually had any kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Is it like an emotional relationship with my dad? Do you know that way?
Yeah.
My biological father, like, you know, it was all very transactional. It wasn't, you know, it wasn't really. Whereas, as you say, you know, your mum and you were so close.
Yeah.
I said I would probably have been the same.
Yeah.
But
I'm not.
any kind of interaction with my dad was always a bit transactional. Do you know that way?
It was exactly the same with me, but my father would let us know how proud he was of us. He would let us know that, you know, that he was the daddy and he was the provider, you know, and he absolutely idolized every single one of us. I'm not saying that, but all his circle, you know, the bar that he worked in, the club that he worked in, they were all the old school and they were all the same. Yeah. They were all like what do you call it, Stepford wives. You know what I mean? It was all of that, and it was all that real toxic masculinity, and nobody was allowed to cry, and I just got on with it, so I did. You know what I mean? Someone's just lost someone for whatever reason, and they're at work the next day. They didn't take any time off to grieve, you know. And I'd be a kid sitting there looking, going, "Oh my God, why?"
Yeah, no, I can totally relate with that. And I think the thing you said there as well was about being told that you were a sissy.
Yeah.
Or
you big girl's blouse. You big girl's blouse.
Yeah. Stop acting like a girl. That was such the norm, wasn't it? Like, it was just totally acceptable. And I guess that maybe and hopefully we'll talk about this in a bit more detail as the episode goes on. But I think a lot of that has fed perhaps maybe into a lot of the internalized homophobia that a lot of gay men, certainly I'll talk on my own behalf, you know, whenever you're growing up, you feel that sense of shame because you're not conforming to the heteronormative expectations of being a real man.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
You're a girl, and don't get me wrong, I was a moan, I was a girl, I was flouncing around, I was as gay as Christmas, do you know what I mean? But that doesn't make me any less masculine. It just doesn't fit someone's idea of what of what masculinity is.
Oh no. And I was exactly the same. Yes, I was quite camp and chubby as a kid, and I was quite loud, but I was never, both my parents would never have stopped me from expressing how I felt or whatever I wanted to say. It was more or less out in the street. It was at school. You know, it was in the youth club. It was in all those places that, you know, ways up. You know what I mean? Shut your mouth. You know, there was nearly just about to say, all of that there. What are you getting on like that for? You know what I mean? And you were like,
I used to get called a big Jenny Wren.
A what?
A big Jenny Wren. Stop being a big Jenny Wren.
I'm going to call you up now. Hiya, Jenny.
No. I think I need my full title. It's Jenny Wren. All right.
Jenny Wren.
But here's a bit of an insight. Into this, you know, and you know, maybe not so much today, but certainly when we were growing up, you know, boys as young as 5 or 6 years old, as I said already, it pretty much sets, you know, and by telling these kids at such a young age that they need to man up, it does set you off on a path, I think, where there's an emotional disconnection. It ultimately becomes like a survival mechanism. Do you know that way? And people start to act out, and you know, they start to put on this bravado and all the rest of it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
which does end up impacting their everyday life.
Of
in
course,
places like the workplace, relationships, and even what we see in the media and things. Do you know that way? So it does have this kind of profound, lasting impact. But
in my older experience, what I have experienced is that, you know, particularly in the gym, you'll find a lot of toxic masculinity in a gym. Not every gym is the same. So I think what gyms have done now, gyms are very aware of that in the past. And I think a lot of gyms now go for a far more neutral mindset of well-being and mental balance and feeling appreciated, you know, and go and talk to a member of staff if you're feeling in any way uncomfortable. That was never there before. That was never there 10 years ago. And I would find a lot of guys, especially in the gym when I'm training, are so laid back and easygoing. They have their banter, I have mine, and none of it is held back, and that's the
Yeah.
difference that I have noticed, and even on a social occasion when, like Christmas or during the summer, there's a barbecue, the banter is always kind of, and it's in front of everyone. But sometimes I
Yeah.
think to myself, now when you go off and you're not here, and it's not the gym setting, are you like that with your mates? Or are you
Well,
real?
actually, I want to talk about this bro
Ah,
culture. I do want to talk about that,
ooh,
but let's
okay.
take a step back just a few seconds. So I mentioned there about in the workplace, for
Yes,
example,
you did,
right?
you did,
So
you did.
about showing up in everyday life. So I mean, I can't really talk about it from my position today because I think that,
Mm,
as you've already pointed out, I think the mindset is slightly changed today. But even if I go back, 15 years ago,
yeah.
I used to have a manager that would sort of present this alpha ideal. Do you know what I mean?
Oh,
Where they must,
please.
where he felt that he had to constantly assert his dominance to be
Mm.
respected. A man's man, as it was put to me, that
Oh,
way.
he's a real man's man. That's just the way he is.
And that was always the kind of the way that it was presented. It was like, oh yeah, he's just being being a dick,
Yeah. He's being
but
a
it's
real Richard.
uh
Yeah, he's being a real
yes, yes.
Richard.
But like I think, and that maybe was kind of very fitting off the time where there was kind of this expectation where men would have this inherent avoidance for
Mm.
vulnerability, not wanting to ask for help, for example,
Yeah.
or even working. And again, I can talk about this from my own family experience where
Yeah.
my dad would work from like 6 in the morning until 7 at night. Like he was overworking
Mm-hmm.
almost. I feel perhaps maybe to try and prove
Mm-hmm.
a degree of worth, not to mention, but to provide for us as
Yeah.
well. Do you know, I that's not lost on me.
No.
But even in the workplace, though, you do tend to have that kind of assertive, ideal alpha lad that
Mm-hmm.
it ends up with bias in their leadership styles. And in the office in particular, where men are viewed as when they're assertive,
Mm-hmm.
oh yeah, he's a go getter, he's a do gooder, that's a manager.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But isn't it very interesting though that when that dynamic flips and a woman does that, they are all of the sudden penalized and and being
Criticized and talked
aha
about, and it's malicious gossip that starts because it's a woman who has taken the lead
yeah
and she's shown initiative in the workplace, and she's
yeah
got ideas and she's got confidence. But when it's a
yeah.
guy, it's like, oh my god, that's amazing.
But this is the illustration of
Yeah.
toxic
Yeah.
masculinity. It's like, if a man does it, it's fine, but if a woman does it, it's not. And that has this kind of knock-on effect. And
Mm.
again, and we will talk on this because we sort of touched on it about women, but we'll also talk about LGBTQ issues as well. And we
Right.
kind of
Okay.
talked about the sissiness and the
Mm.
name calling and all the rest of it. But it's a bizarre concept where a man would sort of work every hour that God
God
sends
sends.
to sort of to perhaps maybe not just provide but to prove something
Yeah.
because we as a society have said that you must provide for your family at all costs,
Yeah.
and at most and that can sometimes have a real negative impact on someone's health or indeed their family life. Like my mum and dad divorced when I was
Mm.
7 years old. You know what I mean? They're not together anymore, but I would say that work patterns and just the impact, there was a degree of in their relationship, that perhaps maybe just didn't work. And perhaps that was part of that
Yeah.
has stemmed from some sort of degree of toxic masculinity.
Well, it has done because it's always sort of been the thing, the go to, that the man goes out to work, the lady stays at home, she rears the kids,
Yeah,
she cleans the house,
yeah, yeah,
and that is one of the oldest tales of time. But
yeah,
in the last 30 years, that has become quite, as you say, it's flipped.
yeah,
You know, and I
yeah,
think a lot of men are now being forced, not forced as in you have to open up, you have to speak your mind. A lot of men are actually not being forced, maybe that was the wrong word, but a lot of men in long term relationships and marriages it's different these days. Marriages to me, I think, are much different because it's both people being a lot more equal with each other. The lady wants to go out to work, she's got a good job, she's got a good career, she's got a good
yeah,
education. And if she wants to have children, she's going to make a deal with the man who she's in love with and they get married. We're going to wait until I have completed everything that my heart desires in my career. And maybe the husband doesn't like that, but this is where this toxic masculinity comes in. So is he going to be like, some, like for instance, like your father, and did he leave your mum? My question is, because he got to the point where he was thinking, why am I doing this? Why am I working all these hours? Why am I building a home and I'm going home and I'm not happy? In today's society, it started to change about 30 years ago, whereas women want their jobs and careers and their own homes and everything first. So what role have those strong, prominent, successful females played to where we are today, with realizing that there is in the workplace, in the home, in the street, in the pub, in the club, this toxic masculinity that has been around for so many centuries, and it's hard for men to adjust as well.
Well, it is, and I think if you have difficulty expressing a degree of vulnerability or even like affection in a romantic relationship because you've been hardened, that's going to have a profound effect on any kind of friendship or even a relationship. You know, that way.
That's true.
And as I said, as I touched on already, that it's this kind of myth that men must always be the protector and providers. Do you know that way?
Yeah.
Whereas you've already hit the nail on the head, you know, that in 2025, that dynamic shifted completely. That's a completely antiquated view. But I think a lot of it stems from certainly when we were growing up, right? So if you look at everything that was on TV at the time, in sort of the media and in, well, just, I guess, in general popular culture, you have this kind of degree of, like, particularly in the 80s, if you remember, there was Van Damme, there was Stallone, there was Arnold Schwarzenegger, there was all these big burly, you know, and they were all beating the crap out of people.
Yes,
you know,
they
and
were.
It was kind of like, but there was always this kind of toughness in male characters on TV, you know?
Because the lead role was always a male lead role.
Exactly.
Do you know what I mean? But one of the pioneering series that came out in the 1980s was actually Cagney and Lacey.
How's your hips?
Thank you very much. How's about that for a plug?
How's the kids?
How's the kids? The kids are good. But I just mean that when that started to happen back then, you know, I thought, like, oh my God, all the Rocky films were in my house. It was always football matches. My house was so masculine and toxic and heavy. And there was no point in arguing with 6 other people who were all male about what I wanted to watch on TV. We only had one TV. So I spent a lot of time with my mum. We were in the kitchen. She taught me how to cook. She taught me how to sew. She taught me how to clean. She actually made me quite self-sufficient by the time I was 10 years of age. And I loved her company anyway. I just think that I remember wanting to watch Fame on a Thursday and Cagney and Lacey at the weekend. And I got to watch them because my mummy had said, listen, he doesn't get to see anything on that television because of all of yous. This is what he's watching. And every Top of the Pops was on an Fame. Come on, 1984. I'll never forget it. And I was so fascinated because I seen these 2 strong, independent women playing the characters of 2 detectives in downtown New York. And it's something I'd never seen before. So when I think back, and they actually, but their boss was a man.
Yeah. Yeah, but I think in those days, though, vulnerable men, in particular, vulnerable men were very rarely seen as aspirational in any way.
That's true. They were never heard of.
No, definitely not. And I think, you know, if we fast forward to 2025, we have influential figures, mouthpieces, I'm going to call them.
Okay.
You know, you've got figures like Andrew Tate or Jordan Peterson, who are always talking about young men and their understanding of masculinity, talking about today's bro culture and how, you know, men today are not men. And I think, like, that has a profound impact. Here's an example. So I mentioned about, like, in the 80s, you had old school action heroes, right? Like Rambo. So there's these sort of big muscular men. Now in 2025, we have TV characters like Ted Lasso. Now, I don't know if you've ever watched Ted Lasso, but it's an Apple TV program. I'll keep it very quick. It's an Apple TV program, and it's about this coach. He goes and coaches a underdog football team. He comes from an American football background, and he came to coach a UK soccer or football team. But his approach wasn't about F this, F that, get it done, blah, 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 blah. he was always coming at it from an emotional intelligence point of view, telling them to believe in themselves. You know, it was being an inspiration, and that's kind of where I'm saying we have this real dynamic between what used to be an action hero and what we knew versus people who are aspirational in 2025, where it's about men supporting men, but talking to men in such a way that actually inspires them, rather than just fueling that sort of masculinity, that toxicity.
Yeah.
Here's a question I have for you. Why do you think that it is, right, that men in 2025, some men, should I say, still see it as unmanly to say, I love you to a male friend?
I think it's intimidating to them. I think it's too gay. It's just a little bit too gay to tell another guy, I love you. Now, they'll probably do it when they're drunk.
Yeah.
Or when it's really, really necessary, you know, maybe at a wedding or a funeral or an occasion or a birthday. Love you, fucking love you, so do see you, I love you. That's the only time, you know, like I tell you I love you all
But Tina, can I just
the
say one
time.
thing though?
It's,
Can I say
it's
one
fear.
thing? Even the way that you done that there, that is so, like, you went, oh man, I love you. Like, that's exactly the only way that would happen, isn't it? Like, when you think about it,
they'll say it in a jokey way. They'll say it,
rather than saying, I love you.
Yeah.
I love you.
Yeah, love you.
You know.
Love you. But then you
Love
see,
you
but then you see, and I think, and I'm not poking, we are not poking fun at people who have a fear of telling their best friend, who are completely fine with being heterosexual and are happily married. I would encourage people, if you're listening to this, you need to tell your best friend what you think of them and how much you love them, because you don't know if they're going to be here tomorrow.
Yeah.
And don't regret never ever telling someone that you love them, because none of us is guaranteed the next hour of our lives. And I think, like, oh God, I don't want to really go down this route because it's not a gay thing. This is not a gay thing, but gay people are a leading example of how to express yourself emotionally, psychologically, spiritually. Do you understand what I mean? We have no F's to give. We have been through hell. You know,
I think just to balance the argument is that not everybody will necessarily agree with your sentiment, but I know exactly as a gay man where you're coming from with this. 100%.
Yeah. And I think that you know, the emotional distance between male friends, I think intimacy is seen as a weakness.
Yeah.
Do you understand what I mean? And it's when two fellas really, really love each other, like two footballers in a team. Yeah. And they're the best players and they're the best mates and they're the best fun and they've got lovely lives and they've fucking idolized one another, but they've never told each other, I love you.
Yeah. But actually this leads really nicely into the idea of bro culture, right? Yeah. So question, do you think bro culture in 2025 is still harmful? Or have you noticed, I mean, you've kind of already touched on this, but have you noticed a significant shift in that bunch of lads who are all out in the bar in 2025 versus all of the lads that were out in the bars in, let's say, 2005?
I have noticed, because some of the sayings that used to be this, all right, bro, all right, chum, what's happening? Do you know, it used to be all of that. And now it's, what I have noticed is, and girls are saying this a lot as well, you all good? And that to me is a way of saying, you know, is everything in your life okay? Are you all good? And I think I have noticed a certain decline in the bro and the chum and the mate kind of sort of, you know what I mean? A lot of people will either call me Jerry or Tina, and they will ask me, well, what do I call you? And I'll just say, well, whatever you want. You know what I mean? If you want to call me an umbrella, call me an umbrella. You know what I mean? I really, really don't mind. But that whole culture, I think, as you had said, now in 2025, and I'm kind of glad to see it, it's making way for what the newness that is coming, the approach, the emotion, not to be afraid to embrace your best friend, your favorite cousin, the neighbor in your street. I mean, look at how many men love football.
Yeah.
Cristiano Ronaldo, right? And I've heard so many people say, love him, about a stranger who they've never met. But yet they've had a best friend for nearly 30 years standing beside him, and they've yet to turn to him and say to him, I love you. Not once.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah, no,
once
I
would they
agree.
say it. Do you know what I mean? And it's kind of sort of, it's a way to express, I sort of maybe under the covers.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And to
Yeah.
say it out loud about another man, but they know that their best mate loves that man too, and their best mate will be going, "Aye, me too, me too. Fuck a bill, sweet, fuck a bill, amazing."
I think just again, just to sort of to make sure that we're covering all avenues here, really traditional bro culture that as I see it and that I can identify with is we would categorize that typically by the competitiveness or this bravado, men out in a bar binge drinking, often objectifying women. And I guess to some degree there would be a little bit of an emotional detachment there. If you're in a group of friends with like real sort of bros, the friendship circle would often have this kind of idea of police behavior where
Yeah.
they would pick on that one guy that maybe was on the phone to the missus and she said, I love you. And he went, love you back, and then all the other mates heard
go,
this. It would be like, oh, I
Oh,
love you.
love
Yeah,
you.
yeah.
And then they would start saying the Richard word and they would meet, you know what I mean? And but to them, it's all a bit of banter. But at the same time, there's no call for it really, to be honest, because they will be saying it to their other half or their wife or their fiance or girlfriend, but they'll not say it in front because they'll know that they'll get ripped to bits.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
But the evolution of that, right? So like in 2025, as you've already said, and you've said this on a number of occasions during the episode, that kind of culture still does exist.
It does.
But it's just not as, I don't know, it's just not as harsh, would you say?
I think it's
Like,
a
do you
lot
feel-
I think it's a lot softer. I think in 2024, 2025, it's still unimportant to call somebody bro. They're not your
Yeah.
brother, the mate. I had a gay guy text me the other week and called me chum, and my thumb couldn't get it on. I said, "Who the fuck you calling thumb?" I actually found it a wee bit insulting. I was like, "You ever call me out again? I swear I'll leave you toothless."
All right, chum. So do you think that but do you think that, like, in 2025, because it has kind of evolved,
Yeah.
that the term really has been redefined, right? It's not kind of what it once was.
No, it's
like
not.
I feel that, like, there's this evolution or a new wave of evolved bros, right? Who they're not drinking as much. They're not going they're not going clubbing. They're embracing kind of wellness, is what I would say. Things like they're not afraid to talk about or go to therapy. They
Makeup.
look at their own personal growth.
Yeah.
Taking care in
Yeah.
their pride in their appearance and looking.
A lot more guys are going for the lotions, the potions, the going to Turkey and getting a wee bit of work done.
But just even how they present, they're well
Yeah.
kempt. They've always got on fleek hair, on fleek eyebrows. Some of them have got better eyebrows than I have. To be fair.
Hello.
Do you know what I mean? But all of this, and even providing emotional support to each other. But all of this is done now under this kind of sphere or this kind of umbrella where they aren't actually losing their identity as a man.
No, they're not. And I think, I know where you're going with this because I see a lot of that in the gym. I see a lot of guys who come in the morning, first thing in the morning, and they bring their kit bag with them and they do a really strong workout. They're getting ready for the office. They're going to head to the office. So they come down in their gym gear and then they've had their shower. Some of them will be in the shower for at least a half an hour, 45 minutes, and they will come out and they will have done their hair, they've done their eyebrows, they've done their teeth, they floss, they smell immaculate. So I think
She loves a scent, ladies and gentlemen. She does love a scent.
I have a nose, let me tell you. But I think, and these are just really nice, well, good, balanced, groomed men who get up early in the morning. Alcohol is, as you'd said, it's not about going out and getting full and having a swally and going out on a Friday and coming home on a Monday morning. Today, 2025, men will go to the gym 2 hours before work. No hassle, no bother, because the endorphins is going to just push them through the rest of that day because they're going to feel amazing. They're going to stay in shape. And they come out in the best of, like, even training gear.
Yeah.
They're wearing the latest training gear. Do you know what I mean? And they look and they smell immaculate. And I just look at myself. I look and I think naughty thoughts first. And then I think to myself, look at the nice car they're driving and they're off to work and they're feeling absolutely fantastic.
Yeah.
Gyms bunged. Nearly all gyms are I think the gym culture has a lot to do with opening up the male toxicity, mental awareness kind of sort of, not a regime, but what's the word?
Well, there's an acceptance there that
Yes.
therapy's fine.
Yes.
Talking about your mental health is fine. Even crying is fine. You know, they don't feel emasculated if somebody's getting emotional or upset. You know, I've been on TikTok. So I was actually on TikTok last week. Our good friend Gail, she's doing kind of like her own video podcast series called Tea with G.
Yeah.
And there's an influential TikToker on there. It's very popular.
It's very close to the bone, let me tell you. I know this other wee show called the G&T karaoke show.
Hey, listen, I've already had this conversation with her, Tina. I've already warned her. We'll be coming after. Don't make us have to go and get the lawyers involved.
I'll be heading down to Larne in my roller boots.
But during that episode with her, Tina, there was the TikToker was talking about his struggles with addiction, and he got quite emotional about it.
Oh.
And what was really interesting is that, like, it made me quite proud just to be a man. I don't know if that's the right word to use, but like, you know, or saying to say, but it was like when you're reading the comments, it was like there was men supporting him, saying it's fine to be upset, you've came for a long way, and it was all really, really positive. But can you imagine where that would have been even 10 years ago? It's a bit, you wouldn't have imagined getting that kind of support.
I listen, you know what? I have seen that so many times in the last couple of years, men supporting each other, you know, in certain situations, and talking openly about what's going on in their heads. With their feelings, the fear that they have and how they felt, and how is anybody else going through this? Can anybody give me some strong, really good, worthy advice? And I think, as you say, a lot more now, and thankfully this is one of the good things about the internet. Gail has created this beautiful, soft, warm, safe place where people can chat and talk quite openly. Doesn't care about what gender, doesn't matter. And And because there was other guys there, they were able to embrace, you know, and say, listen, it's okay. It's okay. Get it out, you know, let it cry. I have witnessed that a few times myself. And being the drag queen, I would often have, especially in my shows, I become the instant psychologist, agony aunt, and best friend. And especially men will want to talk to me and ask me questions about dressing up and about makeup and it's not sexual. It's just real intrigue. You know what I mean? And I think that's how I form a lot of good friendships through the shows, because I'm quite frank and easygoing and down to earth. It's a bit of makeup and a wee bit of a dress and I look absolutely fantastic. So I do, but
I know I get it, like, but just to wrap up the bro culture, I didn't even want to stress that not all of the bro behavior is toxic. No, but I just want to sort of say that I feel that there is this kind of there is a kind of responsibility that unchecked behaviors, particularly around this kind of the old school bro culture that we're talking about, can lead to, I guess, in my opinion, exclusion, perhaps aggression, or even just silence around emotional well-being. Yeah, and this is where I was kind of saying, I said earlier about influencers like Andrew Tate, like they push this kind of idea of dominance and wealth and being emotionally detached. Right. Which just goes against really the kind of the grain. And as I said, there are these growing community of men who are redefining masculinity through things like men's circles, where they just sit down and they emotionally coach each other, mental health awareness, and as I said already, even crying on TikTok. And they're not ashamed of it. But there is a mental health campaign that I wanted to just sort of highlight very quickly, just to plug. There is a mental health campaign that's going on at the moment, and it's a movement, it's a grassroots campaign which has grown quite significantly. And it's a campaign called Boys Get Sad Too. Now, it's a particularly focusing around a clothing brand. It has started in the UK, but it's designed really to start conversations with men and their mental health. So if you're out and about and you see anybody wearing a hoodie or a t-shirt or a cap or anything that says Boys Get Sad Too, it is part of a mental health campaign. Right. You know, engage with somebody that's wearing the clothes. Ask what's their story, what encouraged them to. I've got garments and stuff like that. I've got t-shirts and things like that I've bought and jumpers, and I'm quite happy to engage in a conversation with people about my own struggles with mental health and how I feel. But let's talk about The cost of toxic masculinity.
Do you know men are disproportionately affected by suicide and substance abuse? Men are less likely to seek help or speak openly about depression.
I think that's fair, and for all of the former points that we've just made, that we don't read up until very recently. With men, I feel never really had a forum to speak openly and honestly.
Yeah. I mean, it's, the fear of vulnerability leads to isolation, also poor mental health, and an unprocessed trauma. And,
Absolutely.
As a kid who went through the troubles, lived through the troubles, survived the troubles, like many others, I can honestly say that there was no trauma, but I seen quite a lot of things, and people think I'm kind of a harsh, hard kind of exterior, but it's only because of what I've witnessed and experienced as I was growing up, which was normal, by the way, because that's what was going on. But when I look around and I kind of try to grasp what the younger generation struggle with, and it makes it kind of tricky for me, because I always relate to what I experienced when I was growing up. Okay, we never had the internet. We never had anybody talked about mental health. You just shut your mouth and you get on with it. You went to school through the trouble. You came home through the trouble. You made it home. You were safe, and that was it. But the vulnerability that leads to isolation is obviously, to me, there's a lot of fear. And people are guys especially, are so afraid to say, will you help me?
Yeah.
Or can I talk? Yeah. Can I talk to you? Can I and the big thing I think here is they need somebody they can trust.
Yeah.
Because it's when someone comes to you and says, can I talk to you about something, please? And you go, yeah, okay. They're still terrified, because they're going to share something with you that they're terrified of and they can't handle. And they're also terrified, can they trust you? So there's got to be a lot of trust as well, and as you say, this campaign, what is it called again, please?
Boys Get Sad Too.
Boys Get Sad Too. There's got to be a level of, right, okay, it's okay to talk. It's definitely okay. Go to this website, open up a little bit. You don't need to tell everybody everything to begin with. And I think, I would encourage anybody to contact us on the Sips and Giggles podcast. And if you want to talk to yourself, Glenn, or Tina, one thing you and I will always promise, it would never go any further. And if there's anybody listening to this right now who's feeling vulnerable, who's feeling isolated, is suffering with poor mental health, or maybe has an unprocessed trauma and something has triggered it, send us in something on all our WhatsApp and platforms, and and it's very, very tricky. How do you get someone when you see? Have you ever seen someone struggle mentally?
Oh, definitely.
Yes, yeah, so have I.
Absolutely.
How do you approach that person and say, do you need my help? Can I help you? What can I do?
Just by asking the question. I can see that you're struggling at the moment. Yeah. What can I do for you? Let's talk about it. Let's dismantle that issue bit by bit,
And also, there's identity confusion. Trying to live up to a standard that isn't attainable or even desirable.
I agree. You set the bar so high, it does lead, and that's kind of what we were saying earlier on at the very beginning of the episode, about this kind of idea of telling kids, man up. And that's that sort of, especially whenever they're malleable and they're sort of learning and they're developing their personalities, that can become so ingrained. But even if we touched on it earlier about women and the gay community or the LGBTQ plus community, but this idea of toxic masculinity in itself reinforces the sort of these constructs or systems, in my opinion, of misogyny, homophobia, and transphobia, because ultimately what it does is that it pushes people. And I see this all over the internet. I see it on Twitter constantly. There's always this debate that's raging around, why do we have pride, trans rights, the transgender argument, gender identity, all of this kind of nonsense. And this is not me saying that, that men are responsible for that. That's not what I'm saying, because it's not just men who are involved in the argument, it's women as well. But really this kind of idea of toxic masculinity, which is where we are with this, and the impact the rigidness around that, it can push people into this kind of rigid gender roles, and ultimately then can lead to punishment of people who don't conform.
Right.
As we said earlier, I got called a Jenny Wren because, I was bouncing around the living room, dancing and all this
Being
kind
yourself,
of nonsense.
being your
100%,
gorgeous, colourful self.
Being a child.
Yeah, being a kid.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But even, and we touched on it earlier as well, and it did talk about in the workplace, but it can create like an unsafe environment, not just for the workplace, but even in relationships or in public places as well, especially if you have this old school lad culture, you know?
Oh, absolutely.
But
I think also in public spaces, in public spaces can be sometimes the most intimidating place to try to be your normal self. To try, not just for gay people, not just for the LGBTQIA plus, there's a lot of people out there and they just walk with a look of fear, So, I mean, so what happens when men are taught that empathy and softness are weaknesses?
I think that men change their entire approach, and I think just become more attractive. Honestly,
Yeah,
I
they
think if somebody has a degree of emotional intelligence and empathy, or as you said, softness, just when you're chatting to them, and they can understand that, it just makes them so much more desirable. In my opinion, I think I would gravitate towards somebody that is just nice, rather than sort of being stone cold and really sort of shut off. But it's things like, that's so gay.
Yeah,
it's still being used as an insult in school. I hear this all the time from kids. As you're walking through the town, you're going, "That's gay."
That's pure
Maybe
gay.
it doesn't maybe it just doesn't happen as much as in the workplace. But a friend of mine was out on a staff do, and they were at a bar, and the member of staff was talking to another member of staff about their drink being super gay.
Oh.
And naturally, the gay person didn't really take well to that, because they thought, well, what do you mean my drink's, it's a drink?
It's a drink.
Why does it have to be a so gay drink?
Yeah.
But that came from a female, by the way, not a male. So, so it's still being used as an insult. And that's, again, that's a completely different argument. But I think we need to challenge this idea of toxic masculinity.
Oh, of course.
Because when we do, it doesn't just liberate men, it actually creates, in my opinion, a safer, probably a more compassionate world just for everybody. And I think we can definitely challenge those, as we do with everything. With somebody's, if you witness something in public and somebody's not being nice, then challenge it.
Absolutely. But I don't want to end up in court over it, like. Do you know what I mean?
Not again.
Yes,
not again.
Exactly. I'm on my last legs, love.
Literally.
I'm on my last legs. I'm a new hip. Every time I go to security, I beep 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 beep. I'm gold. Yeah.
But if you want to challenge it, Tina, what can we do to challenge toxic norms?
Encourage emotional openness and allow men to express vulnerability without judgment.
And that's to men and women. The amount of women as well I see on social media saying, you're not a man's man and all this kind of nonsense.
And also celebrate role models who show empathy, kindness and accountability.
100%. 100%.
You know me for my affirmations on the social medias. You know me for every morning, and so does everybody else. I am not really that interested in how pretty I am. I know I'm gorgeous. You know I'm gorgeous. I do not need to be on the internet saying, "Look at me, I'm going to paint my face, I'm going gorgeous." And it's good morning, everybody.
She's not feeling very confident, ladies and gentlemen, as you can tell. She's not feeling very confident at all.
But I honestly think empathy, kindness and accountability are three of the most gorgeous traits in a human being. Yeah. Kindness is one of the most attractive traits a person can have, because what comes from kindness is everything else that filters out of that beautiful human tree. Down every branch is kindness, accountability, care, love, passion, good manners, and at the very bottom of that tree and the roots of that tree is kindness. Yeah. And that tree is not going to grow without the kindness, and you have to be kind to them roots, and you've got to feed that kindness. You've got to be nice, and then you watch that tree grow, and that's a human being evolving. And I think it's just, we need to do that a lot more. We need to encourage that a lot more. You know, kids are going to be kids. Kids are going to say
Yeah.
whatever they want to say. Kids are cruel, you know, and they're going to say this and they're going to say that. But I think when you start to get a bit older and men are men, you know, it's okay to say, hey, that's enough, you know. You don't need to be talking about using those references. You know,
Yeah.
I nearly swore there. I had a vision of me being in a bar getting ready to fight four fellas.
Oh,
But
now were you fighting four fellas? Were you really?
not really, but it was physical. But to also, you look to normalize therapy, open conversations, like an emotional literacy for all genders is
Yeah.
so important, you know?
Yeah.
So, I mean,
Yeah.
say we were talking about redefining masculinity. What would you say?
I think healthy masculinity, and again, this is just my opinion, includes, I feel like I need to say, in my opinion, often.
You do.
Because it is just my opinion. And, you know, we're not professionals in any way. So
I am.
again, these are just our views.
These are just our opinions.
But healthy masculinity, to me, it includes a degree of confidence without this idea of domination. You know, you can be confident in yourself, but you don't need to be dominant about it.
No.
Just demonstrating leadership qualities as well, you know, putting yourself in other people's shoes, that kind of degree of empathy, and also just being honest.
Yeah.
Like, do you know what I mean? Like, just
yeah.
But I mean, what about you? Do you know, do you think there are any kind of role models out there that we could sort of look to, you know, if we're talking about the idea of everything that we've just all encompassing what we talked about?
Yes. Sam Smith.
Well, he's polarizing.
I know. But
You know,
still,
he's polarizing.
I think he's a perfect role model. He's not afraid to be his gorgeous self. And that's what I love about him. Love him or loathe him, that's entirely up to you. That's your opinion. But I look at Sam Smith. He's wearing what he wants. He's eating what he wants. He's singing what he wants, and he's loving his life. And he doesn't care what what the papers say or what the internet says about him. I look at him and I think, go you. Another one who I absolutely adore, Marcus Rashford.
Oh yes. And Harry Styles as well. Actually, now thinking about it, he was another one.
Oh,
if you remember, he was kind of wearing a lot of like what would be typically branded female clothes,
female attire.
Yeah, and he sort of made the headlines a couple of years ago as well. But I think the other aspect that we probably haven't touched on, and we can just briefly, is just the idea of community and allyship. We talk about allyship often.
Yeah, we do. We often do. I mean, look, all you call out toxic behaviours when it's safe to do so.
Absolutely.
You know,
and I think it's helpful as well to create spaces where boys and men are allowed to be their full, complex, fabulous selves. You know,
absolutely. And if they need me there, you know, a shoulder to cry on, or you know, fix their hair. You know what I mean?
So you asked me, let me ask you, what does healthy masculinity look like to you, Tina?
Healthy masculinity includes what it looks like to me is emotional awareness, respect, vulnerability, and the courage to challenge the status quo.
Yeah, I think there's something really admiration about people that, particularly in men who do stand up and go, don't be a clumput. Like, what are you carrying on? You know, that way. But moving forward, what do you think are, you know, ways of really being able to try and tackle this? So, you know, if we were to give a presentation tomorrow to a room full of 15-year-old kids, what do you think would be some of the sort of the key takeaways based on today's episode?
Promote emotional intelligence in boys.
I think that's a really good place to start. We put a lot. I mean, girls are very open. They're very emotionally intelligent. Boys, we're not very good at it.
No, we're not.
I don't think we're really taught it.
No.
You know.
What do you think?
I guess I kind of already touched on this earlier, but I think it's really important that we celebrate men who are kind, nurturing, and who want to work with you, or who want to work together, like the collaborative. Do you know that way?
Yeah. There's also like challenge toxic behaviors when we see them, but do it in ways that invite change, not shame. So it's how you approach. Really it's how you approach what's going on at that time. You know, you don't need to challenge it right away, but what you can say is, "Can we chat with you? out of that, whatever it was that happened, you and I can have a wee chat and explain how that person made everybody feel, not just you, you know what I mean? So,
But I think it goes back to the point that I mentioned there about that one person that might turn around and stand up and go, what way you carrying on, you clump it. Like that's it's non-aggressive. It's a way of challenging somebody whereby you're not being an aggressor.
No.
You're simply calling it out, but you're doing it in a way that's soft enough and it's enough to get people to think about what they've just done, but not to make them feel attacked or shameful. But we are running out of time. This episode is nearly an hour long, Miss Lex.
We're giving them a run for their euros. So we are. Listen, all I want to basically say is, toxic masculinity hurts men just as much as it does others. And the goal isn't to erase masculinity, but to broaden what it can mean. When people of all genders feel free to express vulnerability, ask for help and support for one another. Everybody benefits.
Absolutely. And don't forget the campaign that I mentioned earlier on is Boys Get Sad Too. You'll see it all over Facebook. You can look it up on the internet. It's a very worthy cause. Yeah. And their clothes are actually nice as well, I have to say. But before we go, Legsy, is there anything you'd like to say?
Let me see. Yes. So this weekend I have 4 shows. Friday. Hold on. 4 shows. My fingers wouldn't work. I just want to say to everybody, we're moving into spring. We're moving into summer. Skirts are getting shorter. The blue sky today just made me feel so good. See, you didn't even click on. You didn't with my wig. You never got it. And I thought, I bet you Glenn gets who this Donna Summer.
Is it Donna Summer? Yes.
It's Donna Summer hair. It's Madonna Summer hair.
Yeah.
This time I know it's for real.
But before we go, listeners, we would love listeners to hear your thoughts and reflections on today's topic. As we said right at the very top of the episode, this is probably one of the more serious episodes that we wanted to talk about, but I think it's a worthwhile topic. We'd love to know, listeners, have you ever felt boxed in by expectations of masculinity?
Or how do you define a real man? Tag us at G&T Pod and join the conversation using hashtag #SipsAndMasculinity.
Ooh, yes. And if anybody's interested, you
can
follow up.
Do it again.
Ooh, yes. Did I sound like Callie Minogue? No.
Unless you got a hand caught in the back of a taxi door. Ow!
But if anybody is interested in reading up further about this subject, I would say there are people out there that have wrote the book on it. There are follow-up reads. There's a book out there known as The Mask of Masculinity by the author of Lewis Hose. Go and look it up. It's a particularly interesting read, and it'll give you all of the information that you could possibly need.
Absolutely.
But Lexi,
what, darling?
And finally, we just want to give a very special shout out to all of our fabulous patrons who, without you, Tina and I would not be having the conversations that we're having. So we really appreciate your support. Thank you so much. And if you do want to support us, head on over to patreon.com/GNTpod, where memberships do start from free, but you do get exclusive benefits if you sign up for one of our paid memberships, such as our lock-in episode, which will be coming out this Friday and every Friday. Our lock-in episode is an exclusive episode where Patreon members get it 4 weeks early and normal members get it 4 weeks later, obviously. Right, anyway, I'm going to shut up now. So until next time, legs say chin. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of G&T Sips and Giggles. If you've enjoyed our conversation, then don't forget to share it with your friends, and why not subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. Your reviews mean the world to us and really help others find the show, so please take a moment to leave one. But be kind. If you'd like to support the podcast, why not consider joining us on Patreon? For the cost of a drink a month, you can listen to episodes early, access exclusive digital content, and get discounts to upcoming G&T shows. Your support helps us keep the conversation flowing. Cheers. We'll see you next time. Chin chin.